The Danish Special Forces encountered something a few months ago. We are under attack. Written by TheForestHasEyes. I'm a member of the Danish Royal Navy's Formandskorpset, more popularly known as the Danish Frogmen. For those of you who are well knowledgeable on international special forces, you've probably seen that now famous photo of a fire team aboard a boat with veils obscuring their faces. That is also probably one of the only pieces of information you'll ever receive on us, as my home country's Naval Special Warfare Unit is shrouded in mystery, for good reason. We're NATO's silent workforce, having followed larger nations and militaries into conflict zones such as Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Balkans, to name some places that are declassified. Out of the nearly 600 applicants that the Royal Navy gets for its Formandskorpset every year, less than a dozen actually make it in, and fewer still are able to give up everything to make this a long-term career. I am one of the few. I have been with the teams for several years, and I have found great pride in my service. Above all, I have been committed to every aspect of my job, and that includes the vow of silence that we take. That is, until today. I've waged war against men from every corner of the world. State-sanctioned and true believer terrorist, yet the fight that shook me to my core wasn't on some far-off battlefield, but right here at home. For the sake of those who I've served with and lost, code names will be used to obscure their identity and mine. I lead a 4-man team element under a larger squadron. Codfish, as I'll call him, is our comms man. He's skilled in being able to obtain and maintain connection no matter the environment, no matter the equipment. For those of you who are in, say, the American or British militaries, we use the same ANPRC radio series that you guys do. And yes, they do suck. However, Codfish has always been able to make do, which is why I've fought so hard to keep him on my team. Next is my designated marksman, Anglerfish. Frogman teams are commonly used as a reconnaissance element to move ahead of a larger element and act as an early warning or forward guard. Anglerfish is an essential part of that, as he utilizes a powerful scope to help detail the path and its terrain around it, along with being able to reach out and touch anyone that we need removed. The pipeline for becoming a Danish sniper is one of the most grueling and humbling courses that you can take. It requires a fair amount of calculation, humility, and control. He is all of these things. On the other side of the spectrum, we have my gunner, Largemouth. Any military element assembled needs a suitable amount of firepower in case things go wrong, because they can and almost certainly will. Largemouth is one of the junior guys of my unit, and thus is given a simple yet important task to maintain: the team's fire support. Despite his inexperience, his ability to maintain rates of fire and ammo count, to keep his head down, and to do it all under the mission set of a frogman, well, it's impressive. And then there's me, Kraken. I've served with the unit for almost 10 years now. I've got experience in 4 official theaters and 2 classified ones. My CO calls me his hammer, the one he sends to take an objective that is absolutely essential. Okay, now that you've got the context on my team, let's get down to it. In total, our complete element was around 12 servicemen, and all of us were ushered into one of the briefing rooms per usual. However, the details were slim to none. It all started with the arrival of that damned fog. It's not uncommon. This was during the height of the breakup season after all. well into the snow completely thawing and giving way to humidity and rain, with much of the northern marshlands near the north coast experiencing this. However, this wasn't normal. Centering around a small village, over the course of 3 weeks, all communications went from sporadic to broken to, well, nothing. The military wanted to get involved at first, however, the government wanted the locals to handle it. Leave it to them to let things go from bad to damn effed up. Investigators were sent in, and immediately all contact was lost with them. After several days, only one transmission came from the town before everything went silent.
We're with her now. We have no need for our flesh or the outside world. She is giving us all we need. She is going to make us beautiful.
Finally, the Royal Army was set loose, and things only got more complicated from there. UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, aka drones, were sent in to try and survey the area, only to find that almost the entire area beyond the village was engulfed in a dense fog that a 30 million krona, $4.5 million drone was unable to penetrate, with neither thermal, IRS, or anything. With the situation seeming dire, SOCOM prepared a full maneuver and needed the best of the tip of the spear, and so the TheForestHasEyes was called upon. This wasn't a usual mission for us. There was no knowledge of the enemy combatants that we could rationalize and then distance ourselves from. This was the unknown. A village on our home soil was being held hostage by something. We didn't know what, but what we did know was that every single soul that lived there was waiting for us to swoop in and help. And by every soul that we have ever failed, every god that has ever lived, we were going to. The walk out to the tarmac seemed a lot more tense than it normally had, and for reasons unknown to me, the insertion would occur at nighttime. Maybe our command believed that the usual tactics of night infiltration would give us an advantage prior missions did not. Whatever they thought, they were wrong. Usually we would be climbing aboard a plane to be sent to a different continent. However, instead we were loaded up into a Lynx, a British dual twin-engined helicopter used for close insert. This felt a lot more like a deployment than it did home turf. The flight was short, 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept gripping my rifle, an Mk-18, a short-barreled rifle imported from the United States. Plenty of the corps had started using the new SIG MCXs, but my quad-railed workhorse had carried me through several tours. So, like my team, I trusted it. No matter what we would face, we would encounter it together. We arrived at a staging area near the Uruguay River near Uring. The fog complicated things to the point where the LZ for the bird couldn't be planned. Not just because of any possible OP-4 in the area of operation, but, well, the mist wouldn't allow the pilots to see any trees or flora, which could turn a quick landing into a disaster. So we did things the Frogman way, from the water. A rigid hull inflatable boat, or a Zodiac. They're the inflatable boats you see in every action movie. They're cumbersome, they get shaken and thrown around by any small waves, and they're all around just a pain to use. However, they're somehow still the most reliable source of redundant amphibious transportation that we had second to swimming. Our CO gave us our ramp brief right then and there on the dock. It was short and to the point. Whatever mist exists seems to be screwing with the comms. Whether it's moisture or something else, they're going to formulate a conclusion as to what's going on. And if they can, neutralize it. If not, we were to cut, fall back, and let the heavy guns roll in. We knew what that meant, and that we'd better hope we could find a much cleaner solution while we were on the ground. A pit in my stomach formed as we all stepped into our rubber chariot and started off. With darkness fully set in, the naked eye couldn't see anything, so we took to using our GPNVGs, quad nods as some would say. A set of 4 tubes allowing for a wide view that allowed the dark to be seen as clear as day, albeit with a white and blue hue. This allowed us to safely travel down the river, anglerfish steering, largemouth sat near the front in case we took any incoming fire. Codfish and I were on either side. However, the ride got slower as we finally encountered the fog. It seemed almost as if one moment it was there, the next it was all over us. You could barely see the edges of the river and the green near it, so Angler had to crank way the hell down. It then became a slow crawl through the marsh, our Zodiac turning left and right through the weaving river as the IR lasers mounted on our weapons scanned across the edges of the fog, ready in case anything were to test us. And then, we were only a few kilometers from the village when the engine suddenly died. 1 second, the low hum of the propellers, the next, off. This caused Angler to gaze back in surprise. Largemouth kept watch as the rest of us moved to inspect the engine. Codfish opened it up and was astounded. "It's in perfect condition," he muttered, looking at me. "Something's preventing it from igniting, so it just won't start." As he continued to dig into the engine, triple-checking to make sure that his assessment wasn't wrong, I sat there debating our options as the Zodiac drifted to a halt as the water remained deathly still, leaving us all in a permeable silence. That's what I noticed first. The silence. We frogmen spend a lot of time in the field, figuratively and literally soaking in nature's worst yet most pure conditions. I've spent a lot of time up to my mouth in swamp water and mud. And taking in nature, you realize something. There is always some sort of sound. A cricket, a bird, anything. Heat had returned to Europe, so the winter's cold wasn't in effect. Living creatures had come out of hibernation. And there were some LZs I've been to where the cicadas were so loud that we had to yell to each other in order to be heard. And yet, here it was dead silence. All ambient sound muffled by whatever the hell this fog was made of. And the water was still. This was an active river. There should be some sort of current. And yet, whatever was in these woods commanded its respect. The forest around us was much more afraid of it than it was of a team of Danish Special Forces operatives. We had to tread carefully. I reached for something on my vest. A PTT, a push-to-talk device that connected our headsets to a team frequency. Usually, we were close enough to not need it. However, it helped to minimize the amount of noise we made. We aren't getting any further on water. We need to ditch the raft and head in on foot, I said. Codfish gave up on the engine and took up a watch position. From over the channel, Anglerfish asked, "What about our exfil?" "We'll have to take the long way out," I responded, slinging my rifle as I braced myself. And I dropped feet first into the icy river and dragged the raft to the shore. As we stepped foot on the soil, we beached the craft and maneuvered forward in a wedge. Largemouth to my right, Anglerfish to my left, as he always seemed to help pick the best route to maneuver on. Codfish was further back to keep our comms out of direct fire. The mist gave us little to no line of sight, only being able to see around 5 meters ahead at most, and that was it. An ambush could be waiting around any stump, any log. The trees were so condensed that it meant that we had to twist and turn every single step. And above all, I felt watched. I don't mean my team. Something from beyond the veil, predatory, malicious, was burning a hole right through my soul. Watching us, waiting. This wasn't ideal. We were only a couple of steps from Fubar. Finally, through the milky gray wall, I finally caught sight of what we had been waiting for. The rooftop corner of a one-floor house and part of a wooden fence, poking through the fog like bones to be uncovered. The air was still. Too still considering the port that we had departed from was as windy as it could be. I quickly motioned for my team to halt. Everyone stopped on a dime with not a sound between us. From there, we took up positions. Largemouth took cover behind a large tree and sighted what seemed to be a road into town just to our 9 o'clock. Denmark's roads are decent, but this far out, they left a considerable amount of dirt, cracks, and wear to be seen. Anglerfish covered our 3 o'clock, and Codfish knelt down and heaved his radio pack off his back. The unit was green brick, only visible from the antenna that remained half extended through the top of his bag. Fishing out the hand mic, he prepared to update our unit on our progress. That was until he muttered under his breath in pain, dropping the hand mic. "It shocked me," he said, favoring his hand. That wasn't good. These radios were lined with plastic and metal, preventing any sort of harm to the user. Codfish tried again, keying into the hand mic. However, he shook his head. "I'm getting nothing," he said as he unzipped the bag and revealed the screen and button pad of the radio. To our surprise, it was dead. No frequency, no info, nothing. "You made sure that the battery was fresh, right?" I asked, to Codfish's confusion as he pulled the metal brick from the bag. Of course, I don't... What the... Codfish's words trailed off as he opened up the radio. The beige square battery, along with the entire inside of the radio, was layered with moss. He had to fight to pry the battery out, showing that it was caked in it, along with a ton of condensation. "You know how to maintain your equipment," Largemouth said, gazing at the sight as he went back to scanning the road. "Shut your mouth, of course I do," Codfish snapped back in a harsh whisper. It wasn't uncommon for moisture in a fog this thick to leak through bags, fatigues, rucks. But these radios were, under reasonable circumstances, able to hold up against being rained on for a considerable amount of time. That, and when the batteries were locked in, the compartment is virtually sealed. And it was inside a waterproof bag. Codfish hadn't dropped it into the river as well. Something wasn't right. The more we fussed over the radio, the more it seemed that the darkness around us was closing in, smothering us. "You think that your Harris can reach it?" I asked, referencing the smaller radio mounted to his vest. We all had them to communicate through our headsets if need be, and they could reach out quite a ways. However, a proper radio unit was needed for sustainable communication. He switched to the talks channel and keyed in.
"Any station on this net, I'm requesting a radio check."
I heard his words buzz through my headset. Only silence answered, so I tried.
"Element lead to main. Radio check. Over. Any station."
Nothing. Although no words were said, I could feel the unanimous feeling of dread wash over us. "Pick up. We're heading in," I said, rising to my feet. "What about our comms? We've got no way to alert Maine," Codfish asked, packing away his radio. "We still need to figure out what's happening. No info, no point to us being here. And we're sitting ducks," I explained. I looked to Largemouth. "You got anything?" He shook his head. "Negative, the road is empty," he said, scanning with his MG3. At the very least, we still had the element of surprise, hopefully. "What about you?" I said to Anglerfish. There was no response from my designated marksman as he continued to stare out into the swamp, his rifle braced against the tree. I looked to Codfish, who gazed back. A mutual look of nervousness passed between us. I called out to Anglerfish again, and after a moment, he seemed to shake his head, coming out of a disassociation. No, nothing," he said, picking up and preparing to move. "You good?" I asked, locking eyes with his GP-NVG's tubes as he slowly turned, staring at me. "Yeah," he said in a low tone. The pit in my stomach grew deeper with every single step that we took into that hell. However, I didn't have the luxury of stopping for long. None of us did. I had my team form into a diamond. Codfish and Anglerfish to my right and left, largemouth covering our rear. The roads were definitely experiencing the effects of the rainy season after several weeks of no maintenance, as a layer of mud and gravel caked the surface. The houses around us, dark, filled with shadows and pitch-black voids, were a mix of old-style stone and hay, and newer brick houses with wood and tiles. However, all of them looked deserted. I probably would have been shivering from the wet cold of the air had adrenaline not been pumping through every vein in my body. The low visibility of the fog and the darkness left 1,000 avenues of ambush and approach that needed to be covered for a million possibilities. Our home was being overrun by whatever the parasitic mist had brought, and every single step that we took drew us even further and further into this mobile kill box. I could tell my men were feeling it. Codfish focused far too much on certain windows and shadows, causing him to quickly yet messily snap to new points. From the corner of my vision, through the white blue of my nods, I could see Largemouth's head snapping back again and again. Yet Anglerfish seemed distant. Snipers need to be calm, comfortable in uncomfortable situations, but he seemed too much to the point of complacency. A shape from my front caused me to halt my team. It was rectangular, 4 doors with a license plate that read AW65683. It had a light bar on top. Through the low light, I could see that it was white with jagged markings. A police patrol vehicle. The front and rear left side doors were opened. The back window was smashed from a circular impact mark. Blunt force trauma, a rock, or a brick. There were no signs of life from where we were. We moved in. Anglerfish and Largemouth took the right side, IR lasers scanning through as Codfish and I cleared the open left. It was empty. I had my team set in as I ordered Codfish to inspect the radios, seeing if there was anything that we could work with. After a few seconds, he called me over. He was leaning in on the passenger's side as I'd slid into the driver's seat, flipping up my night vision goggles. Codfish shined a red light. It was how we illuminated an area when we needed to see without nods. It wasn't that great, but as the red glow shined over the dashboard where the radio should be, only an empty radio mount remained, covered in moss. In fact, the entire inside of the vehicle was dripping wet. While I initially thought that it was the fog, the similarities with our radios sent a chill up my spine. "What do you think?" Codfish asked. What did I think? I knew that whatever cut off our ability to contact support did so to the local forces as well. It was attempting to dissect through severing information chains. I knew that something was watching us, as every pore on my back felt like it was on fire from something staring at me. This fog was a screening device. It ate at the town, deteriorating it, taking the people, leaving ghosts behind. However, my team was on edge already, and the last thing that I needed to do was rile them up. We need to keep moving," I muttered. Codfish hesitated for a second before exiting the vehicle. We kept maneuvering down the road. Nothing but shadows and silence greeted us as you could hear the sounds of our boots treading through the mud and rock. Per our orders, we tried to locate any person, look for any signs of life. To no avail. Doors remained unlocked and open. As we quietly breached and entered, we found no one. Just a layer of dust and water over everything. This continued for house after house after house as we tried our best to clear through, investigate, and we came up with nothing. Still, I waited, wondering where the first strike was going to come from. We were in no position to make it, not since we stepped off those docks. We were the best of the best, and I was leading us to our demise. We reached the center point of the village, a large stone church with a main tower that jutted up at least 20 meters high, piercing the fog. In fact, the mist seemed to get thinner the closer that we got to it. My IR laser traced the stained glass windows and doors, the slits beside the doors, the stone stairs. "It might be a good point to rest at," I said, turning back to Largemouth. "Cover the road, I'm going to..." Our low-toned discussion was cut off by a loud bang that shook the silence of the village. The crack and thump jolted us all awake as instincts took over. It was a sound that we were all too familiar with. A gunshot. It had arrived. "Contact!" Largemouth yelled, seeing the assailant before I had. He took aim at the church door with the MG3 and let loose. The German belt-fed machine gun is referred to as the buzzsaw for good reason. In another time, another life, it had acted as a human wave reducer. Now it was our best chance at survival as it tore through the wood with a thunderous burst. The rest of us quickly rushed to the church's stone wall, taking cover as Largemouth placed his gun on the top face of it. We were in no position to burn ammo. With no comms, it meant that we had no chance for resupply. So I called, "Watch and shoot!" Codfish covered us from behind as Angler took aim at the church with Largemouth. I kept my back to the wall and looked at my gunner. "What did you see?" "Handgun from between the doors, cracked off a shot," Largemouth said, sights glued to the front of the church. "Aimed at us?" I asked to confirm. However, he retorted, "It was aimed out when it fired. Likely just a bad shot, lucky for us." Codfish immediately snapped at Largemouth. "You did not even confirm that it was firing at us? It could be a scared civilian." "We saw the patrol vehicle. The police were compromised," Largemouth argued. "Both of you shut it," I barked, silencing their feud. "We need to move. Our position is no longer a secret," Anglerfish muttered, gazing at the fog. My eyes followed his as I muttered, "It never was." Wait, please!" a voice from the church called out. Anglerfish and I quickly had our sights trained on the door with Largemouth as Codfish kept watch elsewhere. From the doors, the handgun, a revolver, was tossed out onto the steps as a police officer carefully stepped out, arms raised. Largemouth looked to me as I peeked over the wall. "We're Royal Army. Identify yourself." The man's head dipped back in relief. "Oh, thank God. I'm Officer Lister," he said, confirming his affiliation. I stood up, a leap of faith that was returned when the officer dropped his hands. He then looked around, anxious of the situation as he gestured us inside. "Quickly, that exchange will not go unnoticed." Although Largemouth had showed obvious signs of hesitation, I took the lead, stating, "Pick up your weapon. You're going to need it." Lister grabbed the revolver and ushered us in. Inside the church, we had finally found it. Signs of life. What was left, anyways. Village inhabitants had taken cover behind the pews and tables. Dimly lit candles illuminating the central area as the windows had been covered with curtains and blankets. The silence of the church broke out into relieved sighs and mutters as we entered. Mothers hugged their daughters and sons. Grandmothers, but little to no males aside from Lister and a couple of other officers. I took this chance to flip up my nods. Lister quickly shoved what was left of the door closed as another officer barred it. Largemouth pulled off his helmet as I could see steam from his hot sweat entering the cold air. "Why did you open fire?" I asked Lister, who rubbed his temples, embarrassed. I thought that you were one of them," Lister said cryptically, deepening the pit of my stomach as I asked, "Them?" Lister then gestured to behind us. The church's priest greeted us, bowing his head. "We are so glad to see you. We are running desperately low," the old man said, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's all right," Largemouth said, setting the MG3 down on its biped as he knelt. From what I can only guess was him attempting to alleviate the back pain that every machine gunner felt. I ordered Anglerfish to take up a good overwatch position, to which he immediately climbed a small set of scaffolds used to help replace and maintain the church's windows, stopping at a circular one above the doors. "I heard you say you were Army," the priest said. I nodded. "Our radios are down, so for now, it's just us. We've been sent in as a forward element to figure out what happened here." "It's a swamp witch," Officer Lister muttered. "Repeat that, a what?" Codfish asked. "Not just any," the priest said. He paused for a moment, locking eyes with all three of us, before he took a shaky inhale and explained. "Over the past several years, the children who lived here said that they saw the currents in the nearby bayou break. However, something changed. When the rainy season arrived, the mist would come and go. They didn't leave. And as our home became more and more shrouded, people began to disappear. First the men, then the police went to investigate, and before long, people started to take refuge." I looked to Lister, dread filling his eyes as he looked to the floor and then back to me. I tried to lead a search party out there," he said, breaking off as he fought to steady his voice. "We couldn't even see what was taking our guys out there before it was just me and a handful of others," he said. I looked back to the priest. Despair of the past several weeks was clashing with the relief of us being here. Even if it was just the four of us, it was hope to them. "So, what the hell is it?" "Nixie," the priest stated, forcing his mouth to utter the word like it was a damned hex. "Or Nook, as the legend refers to her as. Some tales describe her as malicious, a being that lurks the swamps, hoping to kidnap. Others describe her as curious. This seems to be the former." This was a lot to take in. Some sort of legend from the folklore that was as entrenched in our home as the soil and dirt was. I wanted to believe that it was hysteria, the priest and officer attempting to rationalize it. But that didn't explain the fog, the moss, the feeling of being watched, the disappearances, them. Wait, what did you mean by them? I quickly asked Lister. Just as he was about to speak, Anglerfish called down, "We've got movement. Front of the church, wood line, from hour 10 to hour 3, he stated, checking the chamber of his rifle. Lister's eyes quickly locked with mine. "You're about to find out." Once again, my instinct as a leader took over. I ordered the priest to get everyone to the safest position that they could, which, as he then called out, "To the cellar, hurry!" An anxious yet surprisingly orderly stampede filled the church as the dozens inside the church hurried underground. I grabbed Lister by the arm and told him and his officer to get down there and keep the people safe, but not before saying, "Blow out every light you've got here. We need it dark." Lister nodded, snapping into action as he and his men put out every single candle that they could. I flipped down my GP NVGs. What was once a warm orange room became a dark blue and white battlefield. Largemouth was already set up, poking his MG3 through a gap in the broken wooden door as Codfish took aim through one of the slits beside it. With no entrances on the other side of the church, we prepared to defend the front. I peeked through the other slit beside the door. Rifle first, my suppressor leading as all of our eyes were glued to the wood line across the street. Our IR lasers scanned intensely like a light show. And what we saw sent a shiver down my spine. People, the disappeared, those taken, all walked through the marsh and tall grass across from the church. Butchers, tailors, all those in between, and many of the lost officers all walked to the edge of the road and stopped. Their movements were unnatural, and the way that they just stood there, opposing us, daring us, and their eyes, they glowed. Human eyes don't glow. A leader among them emerged, the police chief. Even from across the street, I could see the blank face he had as he stared wide-eyed at us. Silence filled the church, then broken up by the muffled cries of the civilians downstairs. Mothers trying desperately to calm their children down. The thing that was the police chief then spoke. His voice was monotone, like a puppet being controlled. Yet his words came out smoothly, too smoothly.
"Come on out. We need not fight."
A minute of silence passed. I gazed over to Codfish, who gazed back. Largemouth was locked in place, taking aim. There was no playbook on this. How in the hell were you supposed to negotiate with a thing, a paranormal anomaly? I barked back with whatever I could think. "What did Nixie offer you?"
"More happiness than we'd ever known."
His answer was immediate, and the artificial attempt at emotion behind his words shook something down deep inside of me. His voice echoed across the chapel as he continued.
"You can feel it too, as can all of them. Just come outside."
"What's the play?" Anglerfish asked. "We should just lay into them," Largemouth suggested. Codfish scoffed. "Enough of your bullheadedness," he muttered. I looked out and gazed at the chief, who, even now, I felt was looking directly at me. "You're gonna betray everyone that you swore to protect? The women, the children?" I asked. Then a smile crossed his face as he said,
"Oh, don't worry. Once the children went underneath, they've never felt pain again."
My throat ran dry. The last thing that I heard was a large mouth angrily cursing beneath his breath as he let loose. The retrofitted suppressor he had mounted onto the front of his gun barely contained the thunderous sound of a long burst. The rounds tore through the night, the yellow and reds illuminating the scene. The brick of the church shook. The door swayed slightly, and I saw the tracers and rounds tear the police chief in half where he stood. Then, the horde mounted at the edge of the marsh, rushed the chapel. Their eyes were filled with an animalistic rage. They crushed grass, branches, vaulted the stone fence, and yet were completely silent and smiling. "Engage! Engage!" I screamed. The sound barrier of the mist battling large mouths controlled burst of violence as groups of them were cut down at a time. A pile of brass was building up around him. Even then, some still tried to crawl as pieces of themselves hung off by tendon and flesh. Their commandeered bodies now had one goal: breach the church and commit unspeakable horrors to those inside. We would not allow that. Those that reached the windows were taken down by Codfish and I, who, with controlled groups of 2 and 3 rounds, kept the swarm at bay. I still remember it. A series of hands reaching inside, fingers trying to grasp on anything. 3 shots tear through the palms. One hit in the head and it drops them instantly. Another salvo, another down. They were once my countrymen, now my enemy. Prior allegiances didn't matter now. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I remember hitting the release and letting the metal mag drop to the floor as I shoved a new one in and hit the bolt release, replenishing my weapon. "Make your shots count," I yelled. The last thing that we needed was for all of our ammo to be burned through. Just then, the worst call-out I could have ever imagined reached my ears. "Soldier!" a woman yelled from beneath the cellar. There was no way that they could have entered. We had every entrance covered that we knew of. I yelled at my team to stand their ground as I rushed to the cellar, quickly rounding a small banister and heading down the steps. I saw that the dark cellar was bathed in a blue ambient light of the outside. Dozens of people were huddled against the walls. Hysterical screams and the tearing of flesh could be heard as I came face to face with them. One was a man, the other a police officer. Both were coming through a storm door, and they locked eyes with me. Their eyes, even now it haunts me. No pupils, no color, just milky white. When they saw me, they took off after me. 6 shots, 2 to the body, 1 to the heads of both, at just a couple of meters. The sound of my suppressed barrel bounced off the walls in the room, undoubtedly deafening anyone close. Many grabbed their ears, screaming as the 2 assailants hit the ground. I fired an additional round into the bodies, not wanting a demonic round 2. "Lister!" I screamed, looking around. It seemed as if the entire wall moved. A hulking thrall turned, eyes glowing milky white as it turned and growled. I raised my barrel to fire, only for the Goliath to swipe it aside, grabbing me by the front of my plate carrier and throwing me into a stone column. My back hit the wall, my helmet hit the column, shaking my brain as my instinct forced me to rise off the floor, sore as hell. I had to keep going. I messily raised my MK-18, firing off several rounds into its legs, but that only seemed to slow it. Then, it grabbed me around the neck. I could feel my life fading as it squeezed. A vice grip causing me to gasp and sputter. A wretched smile graced its face. My other hand, unable to reach for anything, fought to keep its other mitt from around my neck. Then, a yell came from behind as the priest appeared from the dark. He raised an axe into the air and brought it down into the beast's back. The creature yelled. From his left, one of the village women shoved a candle stand into its face, stunning it. With his hold on my throat loosened, oxygen returned. My hand quickly went to my holster, drawing my Glock from its Kydex prison as I shoved it well into its mouth, firing off shot after shot. Thankfully, whoever made that perfect Austrian handgun decided to not put a safety. The rounds echoed off. Unsuppressed muzzle blast stripping away skin from the entry as rounds painted the ceiling with its vile insides. As it fell down, my body moved like clockwork. I holstered my pistol, raised my rifle, and switched to auto. I riddled its body, burst after burst. My gun went dry. I dropped a magazine, inserted another, hit the release. Click. The priest quickly moved to secure the storm door. I looked around, locating Lister. God. He was slumped against the wall. The behemoth had been at it. As I knelt down beside the fallen officer, he coughed up blood, trying to roll over, but my hand snapped to his shoulder, keeping him pinned. The brute had done a number to him, tearing open his stomach. It was a mess of organ flesh and blood. Even with my nods on, I could barely fight to keep my face from being sickened and mournful. He looked at me with weak eyes. "Is it bad?" he asked. My silence was his answer. "Damn. I guess this is my penance for my failure," Lister said, blood beginning to pour out the side of his mouth as he turned to me. I shook my head. "None of that. Save your breath, officer." The last thing that he needed to do was dump all of his oxygen, blaming himself. Nothing that he could have done could have prevented this. You need to kill Nixie. She won't stop here," he requested. No, demanded with his dying breath. How were we supposed to kill her? Could we even? The word knock was ingrained in Scandinavian mythology as folklore that I knew growing up. Could we even do anything? I looked away, then back to Lister. He was pleading with his eyes for us to stop it, begging me. He raised his hand. I grabbed it, squeezing it as I nodded to him. "You take it easy. We've got it from here." His lips formed to say something, then stopped. I watched and felt the life leave him. As his hand dropped to the floor, I shut his eyes. The best sign of respect that I could show a man who died defending his home. I stood up, gazing at everyone, including the priest who looked at the blood on his hands, then mournfully to me. Then I noticed that the gunfire had stopped. "I'll be topside," I said to him. He nodded, walking slowly over to Lister as I left the cellar silently. Back up top, my team had done their job and done it well. Bodies lined the stairs and lawn. And yet through the silence, Codfish and Largemouth continued to bicker. "We could have," Codfish said, being cut off by Largemouth, who stepped forward. "Done what? Let them drag us into the swamp? I gave us the early advantage. You should be thanking me." I stepped over each of the bodies. Every single face had a story that ended, a life cut short, a family that was robbed or they were robbed from. I didn't count the dead. I couldn't bring myself to. "Enough," I ordered. All three turned. Codfish stepped forward. "Are they all right?" I nodded. Mostly. Codfish and Largemouth shared a look, then back to me. "Lister?" Largemouth asked. I slowly shook my head in response. "Damn," my gunner said, dipping his head. He looked back to me. "Well, now what?" "We need to reconnect with command. Bring in a battalion, maybe more. This is out of our depth." Codfish argued. Largemouth laughed and shook his head. "Run now and leave everyone in there to be slaughtered? How many more has the mist taken? How much ammo do you have left? We are a recon element. We have to fall back." Codfish barked back. They knew we were here since we stepped foot on the shore. If we leave, it'll be on foot and we will be ambushed. We know the direction that they came from, and right now, we are the only ones that can stop it. They won't stop here. She won't. My team was bathed in silence. Codfish and Largemouth looked around as Anglerfish stared, deadlocked into my face. We are the best of the best. There is no one else. We stop her. We have to try. Codfish gave a shaky, unsure exhale as he nodded. "All right. Where to?" "Northeast," Anglerfish said, quiet, scanning the direction that they came from. I wasn't sure if it was wind or something else, but they came from that direction. His words were like molasses, slow and an uneven cadence. "How are we supposed to kill her anyways? She's some sort of witch?" Largemouth asked. "Beings like her are drawn to our side by being tied to an object." A voice caught our attention. The priest. He stepped over the bodies, his eyes unable to gaze at a single one. "Before she could only manifest through the mist or the water. Faint glances, nothing more. If she's here, it means that someone brought her here, aided in her passing through." Aided. Allies. Ones that were taken by the mist. So, someone on our side, I said, a half question to which the priest nodded. I continued. They helped this thing, allowed all of this. Once again, he nodded. "Very likely." "Why?" Codfish asked the million-krona question. I don't know. Power? Maybe she gave them something. Either way, she is tied to something, an object, a rune, a site. Destroy it, and her ties to this side will be severed. I looked at my team. Codfish and Largemouth were nodding. The priest departed, wishing us well. God be with you, son. I must see to our fallen. We didn't know what was coming next, but I don't think that anything could have prepared any of us for it.